Okay, so Casra, you can record the cloud. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new season of Sheltering Places. I am Mohammad Salemy, your host tonight. Just a little bit of info about the program. We started this public program as part of the extracurricular or parallel academic activities at the New Center right after the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We thought that with the lack of public gatherings and places for casual conversations, there was a need for people to come together in other formats. In its first season, we produced more than 15 hours of program on a weekly basis. The episodes range from 5 hours to 2.5 hours, 3 hours. The fifth episode of that was organized by myself and Adnan, my colleague and friend curator, included a lot of interesting people from around the world, from the field of art, who addressed what type of world we're anticipating to see as a result of this type of disease that was going around. Very uncertain time. No one knew how this illness will unfold. The second season of the program was mostly organized by our researchers and students. It was a student initiative to find who they want to speak with and bring them in and have conversation. For the third season, we decided to open the format a little bit, and rather than having this relentless weekly programming, have it a little bit like with sometimes weekly, but not always weekly, and the format will be different. And I decided to talk to three people I really respect in terms of their opinion and their work. And I can do a little bit of introduction if that's okay. Simon Denny, we are familiar with him and his work. Simon's a great artist from New Zealand. Should I go through reading a little bit of the bio, Simon? Because maybe some people still don't know who you are.
Of course, as you wish.
Simon's work explores the cultures and values behind contemporary technologies. In recent years, he's looked at the exploitation of information in data economies, using his work to visualize systems of competing political and economic visions, interrelationships of labor, capital, developments in technologies, and impacts on the biosphere. I first saw Simon's work at, I think it was a political populism exhibition in Vienna, and later at the Berlin Biennale 2016, curated by DIS. And quickly fell in love with the way he works with the material that forms the basis of a lot of my own research. So we have a lot of common interests that just come in and out of overlap. Jaleh Mansoor, she's a lovely, lovely friend and an art historian, for now based in Vancouver. She's an associate professor of art history at the University of British Columbia. Her upcoming book, Universal Prostitution, A Counter-History of Abstraction, Crossing Modernism, 1888-2008. It's very interesting that she puts it 2008. It's very, very lovely. Maybe we can hear a few words about it. It's forthcoming from Duke University Press in 2022. The book traces the historical and structural entwinement of aesthetics and real or concrete abstraction, defined as the extraction of labor power valorized by transactional exchange on the market, to offer a comprehensive account of the political economic forces that determine and motivated 20th century aesthetic abstraction and the advent of posthumanism. And to mix things even further a little bit, we decided to invite David Rimanelli. I know David mostly online. We've never met in person, but David, besides his accomplishment as a writer and a critic and a curator, he has one of the most amazing Facebook accounts, and I guess also mirrored on Instagram, where you constantly confronted with images of art history, contemporary art history, and just general art history, and in relation to how he feels in the day or what is going on in the larger geopolitical world or American politics. And this feed is like, I actually wake up every day and I'm just like looking forward to see what David's posting. He doesn't put a lot of words, doesn't write a lot. It's mostly images, but this feed of images really is a very motivating thing for me, and often makes me look people up and find new threads to research and follow. So yeah, so I thought as a member of the New York art community, he would be also interesting to join to talk about mostly art and art world. I guess people would rather talk about art than art world, but art after COVID and the ways in which the pandemic has already changed the way art is produced and displayed. And yeah, and basically type of brainstorming and critique we can come up with together. So I guess this was an okay introduction. So Simon, maybe we start with you if you don't mind, because you were fresh from opening a fairly large exhibition in Düsseldorf, and also you just got back from Baden-Baden, where you were part of this program that Adnan and Jaleh had put together with art, not art schools, but with art professors and their particular classes to come together in that environment and kind of take over the museum as the beginning of the programming, because Adnan and Jaleh just took over the directorship of Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, and this was their opening act, right? And you guys were all part of it. I guess Hito's class was part of it, right? From UDK, and your class was part of it, and Jan's class was part of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's just talk about your section of it, and how would, if you would like, just like talk about these two things, and then maybe that will give us the chance to pull it apart and go after other issues.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Mo, and thanks to Jaleh and David for also being involved in this conversation. So I actually can't say so much about Baden-Baden. It was really more my class than me that was involved, and I think and certain people in my class responded more actively than others. So certain members of my class were kind of really went to Baden-Baden, spent some time. I think my understanding of the new director's idea is that it's a difficult time for schools, and certainly in my class, I teach art school in Hamburg at the HFBK in Hamburg, and we had far less contact this year physically, obviously, than we have had in previous years, like many other classes and schools all around the world. And I think they were taking a moment to think about what that was with the people that had been affected, but from certain positions which they could relate to. So in Germany, which is not the case everywhere else, certainly not in New Zealand, classes are often framed around one artist, and students study with an artist for several years. And it has its upsides and it has its downsides, but I really enjoy it. I've only been teaching for a couple of years, but I also went through that system because I went to school also as an art student in New Zealand, but then in Frankfurt when I moved to Germany about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But anyway, so they were gathering, rethinking, performing, and I attended for a couple of days and got to witness some of that, but I certainly wasn't driving it. But it was a great thing. It was very refreshing to be all in one place after not being all in one place for some time. I'm not sure how much more we'll be able to do of that, as Germany is changing again in the way that the disease is affecting gathering and traveling. At the moment, I'm in Berlin and we cannot leave the state. So there's that.
Yeah, you're in Mitte too, right?
I'm in Mitte, which
and
is
we're in a red zone, right? Like people can't come to Mitte, or like we're not supposed to go other parts of the city or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a bit of a discrepancy in Germany between what is recommended and what gets observed. That is something that I've noticed compared to New Zealand.
I was supposed to come to Baden-Baden for the period you were there too, but because I was booked to go to Vienna for a talk, I didn't. And then I canceled going to Vienna because of the pandemic. So I ended up not going to Baden-Baden and Vienna. But how did it feel to enter the space and like with your class and just observe the museum again? And also in Düsseldorf, as you were installing and for the opening, because both of these have taken place after the pandemic.
Right.
You know, and you've done a lot of exhibitions solo or group. I remember your presentation in Venice in 2017, right? And yeah, so how did it feel to be back
Well, maybe I can share, like, I actually kind of worked on a bit of a strategy for my Dusseldorf exhibition, which way I feel like I was more, I don't know, uh, conscious about thinking about this situation with. So I knew there would be a certain amount of people able to attend, but I also knew there would be a lot of people who wouldn't be able to attend, and how to address that thematically within the show that I was making, and to try and cater for people who couldn't make it, but also do that in not a boring way, because I feel like there's lots of bad ways to try and, I don't know.
Virtual galleries and virtual.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of made a virtual gallery in the end, but it was also a bit more. Um,
Fun.
uh, yeah, I guess so. And maybe I can. I've got some slides which could maybe help
Sure,
focus
yeah,
the
no problem.
conversation. So I might share my screen.
Just remember, everything you show and say can be used against you, but that's totally fine.
Yeah. So actually, it came out of a longer arc of research when I made an exhibition in 2019, but I'd been working on it for several years at this institution, which is one of the most amazing and extreme institutions I've ever worked in, which is in Tasmania. It's the Museum of Old and New Art, which is a private museum owned by this guy, David Walsh, who is a gambling man. He was a he grew up in Hobart in Tasmania, and was a math whiz. So he came from like a working class background, and he then moved to Melbourne to study math, and then moved to Las Vegas and met a bunch of people who were involved in math and gambling. And he got into designing predictive systems using software that beat gambling systems. And so he made this hugely profitable company, which kind of creams off the top of the gambling industry by beating existing odds consistently, by making better models. So he's quite an interesting guy. And he also started collecting by this habit as well, because he bought a sculpture to kind of take money over a border, which is like a very often used way of making stuff. So he then built this crazy museum, which is a very experience-oriented museum. It's got a number of James Turrells there, two of which you can see in this image. One of those James Turrells is also a restaurant. So that is, it's kind of the opposite of COVID, right? It's like you go there with people, you experience things in haptic space, you pack as many people in as possible. It's all about traveling. It's all about destinations. This whole thing was like leveraged on that. And I made this exhibition. So this is, you can see, you go down into this cavernous space, which is like excavated out of the ground, very raw cliff face. Yeah, this is also what some of the other spaces look like. And I was asked to make a show there. We got into dialogue after he saw my Venice Biennale Pavilion, which I did for New Zealand in 15. And we started talking about, okay, a show about technology, what could it be? And I was doing a lot of reading around, things about how technology was a lot more physical and a lot more kind of, I guess, like taxing of resources than people often think about it. And the language that technologists use to claim what they do is often kind of battling that impression, the cloud and, all these things that kind of naturalize those things. One of the things during the end of my research period, I read this book, which a lot of people I think read, called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. I'm sure we've talked about it, Mo. But essentially, Shoshana Zuboff's thing, where she says surveillance capitalism is a new economic order that claims human experiences, free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. But instead of mining the natural, quote unquote, natural landscape, surveillance capitalists extract their raw material from human experience. And so there's this idea of like maybe making a show in this hole in the ground, in this kind of like exposed cliff face, about extraction, and maybe about comparing like digital extraction to mineral extraction, and kind of showing how those things exist together. And I also got inspired by Kate Crawford, who is a researcher, AI ethicist maybe, who works with many people, and she founded the AI Now Institute in New York University, and Microsoft is involved in funding that too. And she was talking about the need to present like all of the processes that make technology work together in one kind of experience. She said it's necessary to move beyond a simple analysis of the relationship between an individual human, their data, and any single technology company in order to contend with the truly planetary scale of extraction. There are deep interconnections between the literal hollowing out of the materials of the Earth and biosphere and the data capture and monetization of human practices of communication and sociality. So thinking about extraction requires thinking about labor, resources, and data together. And this presents a challenge to critical and popular understandings of AI and other technical processes. It's hard to see any of these practices individually, let alone kind of collectively as they exist. And so she said kind of there's a need for visualization that can kind of bring these connected but globally dispersed practices together into a single map. And I was like, okay, that's a great challenge for an artist or an exhibition maker, and maybe I should kind of work on that in the space. So I proposed this project called Mine to David, and I said, look, I really want to do something which is a kind of like a theme park to extraction, and that was the kind of the idea. Yeah, that's a really interesting museum also in this way because they not only kind of a normal museum, but everybody, when they enter the museum, interfaces with a kind of a device. So you get given an iDevice, like a phone, when you get in the door, and every single piece of information that you need in that museum is on that phone, basically. And so you walk up to artworks and they know where you are, and the information comes up and tells you what you're looking at, and you can listen to like various different talks about things, but everything is through this device, which has, you know, it's very easy then to access and kind of move around the museum. It's a labyrinthine space, as I said, underground. So you kind of need maps and kind of also like lines and things like that. But also, on the other hand, of course, the device is also taking a lot of information about how you're looking and what you're looking at. So it's this very interesting extraction system in and of itself, where you know each viewer is very quantified in what it's looking at. So you can also like and dislike these things on the platform. Yeah. So so I kind of took all this as a given, and I thought I wanted to make something that reflected that. So I made a kind of augmented reality layer on top of this exhibition that I wanted to make. The first thing that you did is you actually encountered an entranceway where in this underground space, in this cliff face, where you saw what Kate Crawford and Vlad and Jola did. They made a diagram, exactly this diagram, which shows everything that you need to see when you're thinking about an automated system. So from the invention of science all the way to all sorts of labor practices, it's a diagram that's supposed to capture everything that makes one single AI system work, which is the Amazon Echo. And then when you kind of interact with that, you as a viewer kind of go online. Oh, sorry, yeah, grab your phone that you're already kind of carrying around. You then hold it up, and yeah, an Amazon Echo pops out of the wall, a little bit like like a Pokemon Go in a way. So there's like your intro to that process, and then you walk into this other giant dark room, which has like a cage in the middle of it. It's a very strange looking cage with all sorts of weird things protruding from it. It's based on this diagram that Amazon.com patented in 2016 for a cage that workers could work in their worker, like in their kind of
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable thing. Yeah, so I was very struck when I saw this drawing, and I was like, okay, that would be a crazy thing to see made. Obviously, these things go on top of these units that Amazon uses in their warehouse systems to rearrange shelving. And usually these systems, like they go see these little orange things, like are robots that kind of move algorithmically these shelves around on the kind of warehouse floor, and they eventually bring the relevant object to the human who picks it out of the thing and then puts it in some sort of other process. No, but like this is a completely what they call like a human-free zone, or what is it? A human exclusion zone, I think is what is the technical name. So they were like, oh, how do we get humans in there if we need them to do something within these shelves? And they were like, oh, no problem. We could just do this great cage. You just put also on top of those robots. So it's a very poetic thing as well. From my perspective, it's kind of like, yeah, human meets worker meets automated system meets Amazon.com. I don't know. It has all these associations. And I went to my local metal shop guy, and I was like, hey, what would it be if we could make this like out of the page into the room? I would like to kind of see that. And so we did. And we ended up with this, yeah, exactly, very extruded system where I wanted to leave on these kind of these numbering systems from the legal notation conventions as a sculptural unit. So you kind of get this crazy, yeah, almost, I don't know, half virtual, half real, all the scales weird, like they've got these giant kind of like hinges on the door, and the keypad is a bit stupid and cartoonic, and you know. And then I was like, okay, I want to see this cage, but I also want to activate this cage. I want to put something in the cage. I want to see this cage activated as a working space. And as I was in the ground and kind of like thinking about like, okay, mining and the history of mines, and I was like, okay, what goes in a cage? Like a canary in the coal mine is the metaphor that comes to mind. And this also is, of course, very conveniently speaking about who gets compensated for doing what labor in what context, right? That, you know, the canary gives its life essentially to warn the human worker that its environment is too toxic to continue, you know? And I was thinking about that, and I was in conversation with some scientists also in Australia, in Tasmania, and we were talking about, yeah, the mass extinction that's going on at the moment, often or almost always because of the industrial practices of people like me. And I was like, okay, what is the most likely bird to become extinct right now in Australia? Turns out it's this very beautiful little bird called the King Island brown thornbill. It was kind of predicted to go extinct within 20 years. And I was like, okay, do we have an image of this bird? No, there's only 5 photographs. So they sent out a little group of people to record the movement of this thing and record the audio of it. And this is the sound of the King Island brown thornbill. Very beautiful sound. And then I made a kind of a simulation to go inside the cage. So when you kind of had your augmented reality layer, you then scan this kind of strange pyramid inside the cage, and this King Island brown thornbill again virtually sort of pops out and flies around inside the cage. And quite a moment to hear this, you know, nearly extinct bird. Also, when you get a bunch of people doing it, there's this crazy thing where it's a bunch of people looking into their phones with these kind of tweeting coming out of it, but there's nothing in the cage. So also as an observer of the artwork, you get this very strange experience of kind of seeing people glaring into a kind of human worker cage, looking for this bird that's not there. You also get this kind of audio cacophony of more bird sounds than there actually is alive, maybe.
Simon, so this was also in the Düsseldorf show, or this is only from the Tasmania show?
This is also in the Düsseldorf show. So this is maybe a good time to segue into that. There were many other things also down there.
You know, it's very hard to stop you and say, okay, let's stop and talk, because all of this is very exciting. So I hope the other guests also agree that like we still want to hear a little bit more of this, right? Before.
I mean, I'm open. Yeah, I can.
Go ahead. Maybe it's good to move to Düsseldorf, and then we will like interrupt you.
Sure, of course. So I made a whole installation that responded to this, and also looked at the Australian mining industry a little bit as well. There were other kind of displays of that, of various different machines that automate mineral mining in Australia. And I did this exhibition there, but then I was invited to do a version of it in Düsseldorf at the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, which is in a very different building, and that was this year. So it's not in the middle of the ground, and it's not in Australia. And I wanted to kind of have a kind of a similar dialogue, but make it make sense. And so I decided to work on this parallel exhibition. I would install it in these spaces, which is a former political building, but I would also install it in Minecraft, this gaming platform, which is what's known as like a sandbox game platform. where you can, kind of design your world. And it has a similar extractive logic to normal mining, where you kind of mine resources which are just there. And you kind of like turn them then into useful things and kind of make cities and whatever. And I worked with this amazing guy called Jan Berger, who, you can't actually see him because I cut him off there, but that's Jan's avatar. And he is an amazing artist who works with other artists to build their artworks in Minecraft. He's a Minecraft-based art institution where he does projects with artists who don't know how to use Minecraft and never have done anything in it. And we decided to build a Minecraft version of this thing, which is the Zeischer Zollverein, which is in Essen, very close to Düsseldorf, which is actually the remnants of the largest coal mine that was ever in the Ruhrgebiet, which is like the area around Düsseldorf, Cologne, that was responsible for producing a lot of mineral wealth.
Let's not forget Bochum. Bochum is very important in that few cities you talked about, right? Yeah,
exactly. But this is a very iconic building, and we decided to make a version of this mine in Minecraft. So this is the Minecraft version of the Zeischer Zollverein, and we installed my exhibition underneath that building as if it was in one of the mine shafts. So we have this kind of special Minecraft server, and we basically did like an installation based on that. And so you could kind of enter the Minecraft site. Also for the opening, this is maybe like a COVID thing as well. We were like, okay, a certain amount of people can come, and then other people can kind of watch us on a stream that we will do of an opening talk on YouTube, and others can even join in the Minecraft platform and kind of meet socially in the space as an opening as well. And so this is kind of physically what that looked like. So we had a distanced opening in the museum space itself. This is like their kind of atrium that they have in the middle of that building. And then, me and my friend Boaz, we talked about that. And then we also were in the Minecraft space online at the same time. So can't see that because it's being cut off by the Zoom. But essentially, we were both kind of inserted over the picture. And then like a bunch of people came into Minecraft and were kind of seeing that at the same time. Some people made some trouble. They kind of pulled stuff down. We got some kind of vandalism in there.
There is no way to lock people out of non-participation, right? In Minecraft.
Well, weirdly there is, but like you can only do it so there's various different ways of kind of making the space interactive. But in order to kind of keep the feeling of being in Minecraft, you can kind of cut off most things, but apparently paintings, believe it or not, can still be taken down. So everything else is kind of safe, but anything that has a kind of a customizable imagery can be kind of taken down. And so we got this guy who's a Bitcoin troublemaker coming around and kind of taking down the paintings. We also had other live streams of the live stream. So this is a friend of mine, Joshua Styrell, who has his own Twitch stream, and he streamed my stream in the Minecraft. I mean, it was all very multiple universes. And we also got this amazing review of the Minecraft exhibition by a Let's Play reviewer on YouTube. So this guy, all he does all day is review games, and he then reviewed my game. And he also made his own sculpture in there. So this is a photo of a still from his review where he looked at my exhibition, which is full of these machines, which are made for automated mining machines. And he made his own one that actually does that in Minecraft. So it kind of bores through the hole on its own. So it's this very incredible user-generated response and very strange and interesting review.
Yeah, welcome back to Minecraft.
Yeah, anyway,
it's been a long time since I played.
Incredible.
Yeah,
excellent.
So maybe you have more things to say that will be relevant before we.
I can I'm kind of like
I just want to start with like a comment I have about your work, and It is that every time you try to every time an artist tries to basically visualize or spatialize some of these complex abstract systems, right? As you were explaining, there's always a danger of aestheticization and unintended romanticization of the very same thing that you want to bring to people's mind, because the way you do it, a perfectionist, you know what I mean? You end up actually making it look much better than it is. And in a way, while critiquing it, but also establishing it, right? But with your work, especially like I remember the work you had in political populism, that's where I began like paying attention to you. It was a intentional like act by you to keep these systems as ugly as they are, right? So it's like there was no way to go around the fact that like these things that we have to pay attention to are fucking ugly. And I love that also in the way you did the Bitcoin setup for the Berlin Biennale. You know, you of course it's aesthetic and art, but there's something inherently like you know your work does not hide within its form the ugly form of what you're trying to the ugly form of that abstraction that you're trying to like visualize. And that's why I kind of like your work. So maybe this is a good point for maybe Jaleh to join us if you want.
Sure.
To hear your voice.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to say congratulations on your exhibition in Dusseldorf and Baden-Baden. That's no small matter. And I should correct myself because I was in Vienna for that populism exhibition. So I probably have encountered your work.
It was downstairs. Life. It was downstairs before you go upstairs.
Yeah.
It was in the room as you go in. It's very easy to not see it because it wasn't in like the part of the bigger stuff.
Yeah. So that's beginning to ring a bell. So I guess I'll piggyback off of what Mo just said, this kind of classic problem of aestheticization. I'm sure you've heard this a million times. I'm not really concerned about about your aestheticizing these, as Mo says, fucking ugly extractive processes, whether they're in the world of quote unquote natural resources or in the social field. My concern is twofold, and I'm, you know, again, I can't congratulate you enough, but it's my métier, right? It's my job to be critical. First of all, I'm not at all certain that this form of mediation would come across to the 21st century viewer as ugly. Because let's face it, we've all been raised up in games and Minecraft. My daughter is always, you know, in her virtual space of Sims or Minecraft, or this is not ugly to youth at all. These are the very forms of mediation that hold young people, Gen Z, I don't know, anywhere, millennials and after. These are the very forms of bubble-like mediation that protect us most from having to encounter anything real, anything concrete. And so, you know, the kind of metaphorical canary that you mentioned, the canary in the coal mine, that is precisely the kind of experience that the form of mediation that you're using is a prophylactic against. Right? So the viewer will will be disoriented and have all these kinds of things shooting at them. Like you said, there was a review of your game on YouTube that then interfered into your game. So you have these kind of labyrinthine folds of intervention. But no matter how many kinds of spontaneous interventions are made into your platform, the platform a priori is a kind of prophylactic measure against the experience of actual mining, whether it's in the social field or in the natural field. And so, again, I'm not concerned about aestheticization, romanticization, spectacularization. I appreciate very much that what you're doing is worlds away from what is his name? It slips my mind. Andreas Gursky's Amazon. You might know the piece.
I know the piece. Mm-hmm.
So, if we could curate a show next week about how contemporary artists are thinking about the Amazon phenomenon. We could put Gursky in there and your work in there, the cage and various things. It's not so much a matter of spectacularization at this historical juncture. It's a matter of finding a form of mediation that is going to really be honest about what abstraction is, without sort of putting a layer of like a condom on, right, against actual abstraction, which is my concern about the game. I think your choice to offer viewers a game rather than a catalog is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Mm-hmm. Right? We know, we've all read Rosalind Krauss's essay about the cultural logic of the late capitalist museum. We all know that, yada, yada. And we all know that viewers now skip the show, flock to the gift shop, get the catalog, take it home, fetishized objects. So you've punctured that really nicely. Mm-hmm. But the question of abstraction and the way in which we're implicated in this totalizing, immersive kind of nature, and the way in which it's forming not objects necessarily, but subjects, and that's what my book is about. We are formed by capital, right? Mm-hmm. We are nodal points. We are like the mouse or the avatar. We're taking it in, putting it out, inputs, outputs, etc. But I think that for artists, and I appreciate Hito Styrell's project very much. I know she's trying really hard to do this, but the trick on the horizon for you, for her, for anyone is still to try and find a way to make a map or a counter map without protecting us from what you're attempting to show us. Right? You're walking a very fine line. You're doing this kind of tightrope act where your attempt to give the viewer an exposure to reality is also a way of making sure they never get that exposure. It's a very sort of fine dialectic. And I guess I'm very much indebted to a book by Alberto Toscano and Jeff Kinkle entitled Cartographies of the Absolute, which I'd highly suggest and recommend, about the incapacity. You can't represent abstraction because abstraction has shattered representation, right? We can't figure what we're now living in. And this I think is the big problem and question of whether art can exist in the present moment. First of all, whether art can exist in the present moment. And second of all, whether art has any kind of fighting chance to begin to map or to figure the reality of abstraction. So
this is a line coming from Jameson to people like Toscano and Galloway. This argument.
And I would piggyback on that argument, but I would also add a book that has meant a lot to me, an argument that's meant a lot to me since 2008 or so, is of course Claire Fontaine's Ready-Made Artist and Human Strike, right? So I would add their line of thinking onto Galloway, all the way back to Jameson, exactly that. So to put it on a nutshell, and then I'll close. I can't congratulate you enough. I think what you're doing is very important. It's a great intervention. My reservations are around this problem, which is your problem set, about the figurability as such in a post-representational moment of this kind of the seething, monstrous real abstraction whose belly we are being digested in as we speak. So it's always a question of how you're going to mediate, right, the real movement of history. It's your challenge.
Right. Do you have artists that you feel for you do that really well?
Yeah. Artists that I feel have done that really well. Well, again, it's practically impossible to do that. The stakes are high. The problem set is difficult. But artists that I can think of, as well as yourself, who are making a very courageous attempt at this, Styrell and Thomas Hirschhorn. I think Hirschhorn's work is incredibly important. I don't know how much time you've spent with it, but I think it's unconsciously there in your work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Caveman Man especially came to mind when I was reading about your work in The Guardian. Caveman Man and other exhibits like that in Chelsea, in New York, in the early 2000s.
How do you think that works in these artworks that you've responded to in the way that you think it does that? Like how does that function in those artworks? Like what's your experience of them? What do you feel as you are going through that experience of looking at them, which says like, ah, yes, this is doing exactly that thing, you know?
Right. Well, again, what you're doing, this quality of immersiveness, immersion, disorientation, these labyrinthine spaces, the inability to find a place to focus, right? It's kind of like, as Monica Vitti says in Red Desert, when she's going through this crisis, I don't know where to put my eyes. I don't know where to look. And that's, I think, I would say that yours and Hirschhorn's work share this realization that kind of, you know, we've all been told that we're living in an optically saturated world. We've heard this a million times. You know Martin Jay's Downcast Eyes, and that vision has been completely reified to the absent to excising the significance of other senses. And I think that has changed completely, and your work gets at that. Right? We're not in an exclusively visual place. We're in an immersive place with sound and it's kind of haptic quality. And this, like my daughter is always telling me that when she plays Sims, she feels that she's entered that space. I think your work and Hirschhorn's work gets at that.
Like Minecraft for ages, time goes really fast. You kind of you get in, you build a building, and you're like, oh, it's 6 o'clock.
Or even worse, or in Sims, for instance, where the kind of the quote unquote biological time of the characters keeps on ticking, whether you're playing or not. So for example, my daughter will be at dinner with me and she's like, oh, I gotta go. Daphne, my character, is about to give birth. You know, this kind of thing. And I'm like, what? So no, I appreciate this courageous bid very, very much. And I think that what you're doing is self-evidently a lot more sophisticated than Gursky's Amazon, where he's trying to give us this sublime picture.
He's got more reach, though, so.
Yeah. But again, I think that this is the problem set of your generation is to offer what you say you're doing without simultaneously putting too much of a protective wall against precisely that. But I've been speaking far too long, so I'm very much.
Don't say that. We'd love to hear you because.
Well, we can come back, but I am personally really excited to hear what David has to say because I've been following his work for a very long time. I'm not your Facebook friend, but in real life, I've looked very carefully at what you've been up to, and I'd like to know.
Just to like synthesize and like what Simon said and what you said and kind of like put it together is like, there's a heightening happening here after COVID, like all these conditions that Simon's work was already trying to talk about, and then you bring in terms of this impossibility to almost represent this totality, all that almost seems to be like on crack after COVID.
Yeah,
we're moving even faster in certain ways in this direction, right? And I think
I appreciate your line of questions about the art world, and I will confess to you that since moving to Vancouver in 2011, I have no connection to the art. I feel like I'm living in the outer skirts of a sort of hinterland or a kind of Siberia. I have very little traffic with the quote unquote art world or the art worlds since having moved here. But I do feel that art is the exception to the supposed shutdown that we've been experiencing with COVID. It just seems to be ever accelerating, right? Because you can stay home and put up your little paddle to bid on, you know, whatever Richter. I'm sure you all know the film, The Price of Everything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know that. And you know Richter himself being quite upset that his smallest painting costs more than a home, as he puts it. But I think that COVID, as Mo says, is like a shot in the arm or a form of accelerating the already autonomous path that art is on, that is completely indifferent to us. And that's where the quote post-human aspect of my interest comes in, that this that capital is autonomous from our interests, and art very happily goes along for the ride.
David,
you know,
would you like to
we're not living in a humanities moment anymore, but I defer to David.
Oh, don't. But I guess it's my turn. You know, everything that you and Simon have been talking about is a very intense sort of experience of like the changes in our like culture.
Yeah.
Went on for time, but I think they I feel there's like not enough of an antecedent to that as changes in culture, but they feel so much more intense right now. Many people have talked about like COVID as something which brought to light so much more than these things that are so apparent for ages, like the racial issues, the racism and everything in this country. We know about that. We're Americans, we know, and the rest of the world knows, or some of us know or pretend to. And, recently it's like because of the pandemic, it's become so much more vividly horrible in our awareness of the way it unequally affects people. So that's like another thing, like we talk about the art world as something which is sort of like not so affected. I mean, oh God, I don't know. I'm sorry. This is also interesting. I wish I could take a break and write notes and come back to you. I'm not being very articulate. I guess it's about dealing with like these changes in our in culture and in the way we react to things, the way we deal with things that are very important to us, or they used to be really important at least. Like, why are we all in this business of ours in one way or another as artists or curators or art historians, etc., in this like diffuse but palpable, understandable art world? We know what we mean when we say the art world.
Yeah.
Why did we ever come to this? Sometimes at a certain point in your life, you don't remember anymore. And that's something that I think, the idea of it continuing, going on throughout the pandemic, and it will continue. I don't know, that fascinates me because I feel I'm often trying to deal with like something that I used to have a very ingenuous and then sort of kind of indifferently cynical approach to, but enjoyably cynical, the art world, how it works, its machinations, what's good, what's bad, who's in, who's out.
Yeah.
Where do I factor into this to give my own sort of, pathetic, egomaniacal, solipsistic, perspective on the whole thing? And what am I trying to say? I think I had something to say and I lost the train of my thought, but oh dear, I have. I'm sorry.
Well, while you're gathering your train of thought, if I can just correct for something I said. On the one hand, I think COVID and the world that we're living in after COVID has made the experience of art as we once knew it very difficult, right? All being in a hot, I'm thinking of all those openings in New York on Thursday and Friday nights where you enter a tiny little white cube and it's all these people cheek to cheek, right? It's like the 90s version of a disco or the 21st century version of that form of sociality. I think that's over. But the abstract part of the art world that I think is concerning Denny's work very much has, as Mo said, accelerated. So it's a kind of a split. All that sort of pleasure and social joy of entering the room with a glass of champagne and being people everywhere. That I'm concerned has come to an end, at least until a vaccination has been located. But
so the 19th century part is done.
But all the other aspects, the auction numbers are going up, the wealthy have become wealthier, that kind of runaway automatic train of the art world, that capacity, I think, has gotten doubly swift. It's kind of bifurcated. So I just wanted to correct myself there.
Oh, these processes, I mean, were already at play, right? Before pandemic, because if you remember, even like last year was a year and a half ago, where people were talking about how fairs are becoming expensive.
Right.
So people like Zwirner were talking about how they should pay more because they make more money to keep the system going. And then you go like, okay, you must be making so much money that to preserve the fair system, you're actually willing to pay more so the smaller galleries can come, right?
Right.
Next thing you hear
they mentioned that in the price of everything. Even the big wigs who are running these galleries are mystified and don't know what's going on and think that there must be somewhere an end to this or some pin is going to break this bubble. So to your point, there's this, I think that those players are very aware that they have to lubricate the system if it is going to continue at all, as you mentioned, but on the other hand, are themselves mildly frightened. That this is even hitting outside their expectations, even Larry Gagosian. But anyway.
Yeah, and like recently, Zwirner announced that they're going to have a black gallery, right? Like this is like something that also connects to what David was saying, right? They hired a new director who's African-American, and she will put together a program of exclusively African-American artists for an African-American branch of Zwirner, right?
Right.
So again, business can be that bad.
Business is fine. I mean, it continues. It's just a question of like, the way it's, I don't even know why I'm speaking about this. Like I'm the great businessman of the art world, the absolute antithesis thereof. But, if anything, the idea of smaller galleries is further decimated by, what's going on because, there's like, seems like there'll only be 3 galleries and Gagosian won't even be one.
Yeah.
That'll be like, Gagosian will be like a relic of the past, like a circa 2000. Will be a whole Gagosian.
I sort of see.
Well, I don't really think that it'll survive, but it's
I imagine in our future there will be whole malls, the Larry Gagosian Mall of Art, and as Mo said, there will be the like Mattel had Black Barbie. There will be the sort of cell for that demographic, and then it's anyway.
But again, these things are totally in line with this type of like Amazon future.
Of course,
that is not art, but it's commodity, right? So it's like parallel together, right? Like these two, the split. The same thing happening. Like what I mean? Like small stores, restaurants are closing, but Amazon and food delivery and all sorts of other stuff that's more involved in this abstract systems are thriving.
Precisely.
And doubling and quadrupling their profit.
Except in a delivery person.
Yeah, they're not going to pay that person. Also, just to say that, like we have both Adnan and Chala on the sidebar. I wish we could ask them to join maybe and like later on and just pose us questions. If they don't feel like showing their faces, I would like try to like re-articulate their questions or what they're bringing up in the sidebar. But yeah, so Simon, we talked a lot now. I think it's your turn to. I told you everything you say will be used against you, and you didn't believe me. So it's your.
No.
It's not how I read it. I mean,
we're cheering for you.
Of course,
Yeah.
but that's what you get with Jaleh. You know what I mean?
it's right. I mean, perhaps I missed a tick here, but I didn't feel that there was any antagonism. So, um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think all of what you say makes total sense, and it is like a total head fuck. What's going on, and one grapples with it and tries to do something that makes sense for me and the people I'm talking to, and tries to make sense of being an artist in the face of these things. This is what the result is. So, you know, sometimes it speaks, sometimes it doesn't, and I'll keep doing it because maybe to speak to David's point, I love what I do and who I'm a part of, and I don't know, I've lived my life in this world, and I couldn't imagine another one. So
no, and I should clarify. When I make these absolutist statements like art is impossible, these kinds of things, it's always part of a sort of larger dialectical way of thinking. It's precisely, it's Adorno 101. The very fact that art is impossible makes the stakes higher than ever. It makes the fact of making art more palpably important. We all look to artists because they're the sort of last sector in a fully abstracted, de-skilled, kind of anonymous world. The only people who can still really see something through from inception to actualization. And that's a lost feature of what it is to be human and to make things. I mean, unless, it's ridiculous. You can make a recipe at home or something, but I mean, something palpable that is speaking to its time and that will be offered to a collective reception, as Benjamin would say. So the statement that art is impossible is another way of saying that, we need you guys more than ever. So I hope you get that, that sort of two-sided thing. Yeah.
For sure.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is. It's dialogic, it's social, it's, I don't know, all these things that make life fun. Yeah.
There's another side to the art world beside say the commercial galleries and what's happening in like the commercial world, and which is like the institutional or like government side, right? And I think larger institutions with big budgets who are operating in economies that are not so devastated by a combination of climate change and COVID, and still can have like $1 million budgets or multi-million-dollar budgets, right? Also increasingly find themselves to becoming bigger players because they have a larger stake in defining like who are the artists who are gonna like get carried through from before the COVID to after the COVID as like people who needs to be talked about or people who need to be written about, They also are like finding themselves in a position of power, more power, I think. I think they're on the side of the accelerating side too, because whether they know it or not, they're gonna have a lot of power in the future because as smaller initiatives, money's dried up, artist-run centers dry up, these larger public institutions will have a much more powerful role in defining what is art history in a way, right? So,
and I think what you're saying is absolutely correct about the Canadian context.
So please elaborate a little bit, because it also applies to Australia and New Zealand and a lot of countries that follow that model of art funding and all that. And Simon's familiar with that system.
Yeah, it's my understanding from recent participation with smaller shops that are affiliated with artist-run centers that since the beginning of the pandemic, governmental funding has quadrupled. So suddenly we find ourselves with much larger budgets than we had a couple of years ago. But then, as you know, in Canada, from the Shirk and things like that, the demands that are placed on recipients of that kind of funding directs things a lot. It doesn't come without strings attached. Let's put it that way. So
so the public institutions have their own visible or invisible string as much as the gallery system does, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Very interesting to see where we're heading, but especially with this like opening up and closing down and opening up and closing down, it will also have its own impact. Like Simon, you were saying, like Germany's closing again, which is true, right? So
yeah, I mean, yes, and I felt quite lucky to be able to open a show at the beginning of September, and also to be able to go to Baden-Baden during that, because yeah, I mean, it was reduced, but it was still a real opening, and we still had a dinner, and still friends were able to travel from within the country, and even some from beyond the national borders to see this show, which has kind of felt like a very special thing.
Yeah.
And
must have been thrilling. Thrilling to have that.
Brimming with excitement.
Funny, the name keeps coming up too, but Hito also had a show open in Düsseldorf too, just like a week or two before you, right? So Düsseldorf was a bit of like a center of this type of like capital criticism, new work, and she has new work in Düsseldorf too, same as you.
She does, yeah. So Hito's exhibition I haven't seen yet because it opened a couple of weeks after me.
After?
Yeah, that's after. So I had a show open at the beginning of September, and she had one a couple of weeks later open. And it's in the same building. She has this gigantic underground space, which is very beautiful. It's the kind of main space of the museum, and I have this front space, which is sort of on the second floor. Yeah, has looks over the park. And it's but it's me and her. It's very exciting dialogue also for me, longtime fan.
Absolutely, two Berliners. Now, did you get a chance to show us or talk about the new work you did beside the Minecraft, or the Minecraft is the only new work in this sort of show?
No, I actually, interestingly, maybe I didn't, and there were some new pieces. One of the things that I did, so I did these sculptures that I didn't show you, which were kind of cardboard pop-up displays that you might see in a department store that also at once depicted automated mining machines that are used in Australia to mine stuff out of the earth. But they're also like a shelf and a presentation system for like a commercial presentation system for my catalogs, which are also board games. And it's an adaptation of a board game that was very popular in Australia, called Squatter, would you believe? It's the most popular board game ever produced in Australia. Sheep farming, a model of the sheep farming industry. And I adapted that to this kind of platform capitalism narrative where instead of collecting and monetizing sheep, you collected and monetized data. And then there was kind of like critical essays in there as well. So that was in that room. And then of those machine sculptures, I also collaborated with a courtroom sketch artist from Brisbane, who has been making courtroom sketches for 30 years in a court in Brisbane, in Queensland. And she amazingly, there we go. She amazingly produced them speculative courtroom trials documentation with me of trials that never happened. So of the people that own the companies that do the mining, as if they were on trial for the things that they're doing to all the people that they displace, all the kind of companies that they work against. And they're quite chilling things because they're, I guess for me, like a drawing of an idea of responsibility which can never be, because it's the system itself that keeps these people in power. It's never going to be the system that holds them to account. And it was like a different drawing system. Also, to produce all the imagery for my board game and my sculptures, I used an artist who does artwork for first-person shooter video games. So it's an aesthetic which is very gendered. It's very you think of a very particular context and attitude when you look at the work. It's kind of fake brushy. It's a digital brushy painterly effect, but it's very removed, extracted from a real brushy. And then to kind of contrast that with these smaller, very slight drawings that were made in these courtrooms, and this courtroom drawing style was also very cool. I mean, I can, if you like, I can show you a couple of images.
Yes, please.
Just to document a little bit, because So these were these sculptures of these machines, which are used to automate mining systems. This is a satellite system that you need to peruse them, and in the background is a real-sized tire of an automated truck, and they are also holding these board games called Extractor. And this is Sharon, who is the courtroom sketch artist who I work with.
Oh, amazing.
She is a wonderful, very cool person who's been, as I say, drawing sketches in courtrooms for 30 years. And she, for example, did this drawing of the people that own these companies, a very different scale, a very different kind of touch to the mark making. And it's a diptych. One is a still from advertising that company uses to promote these machines, mostly for sales to other mining company executives. And another is this, speculative courtroom. And you can see if you cycle through these, of course, all these people are often of the same color and of the same gender. And it's all, there's a smattering of white women, but it's mostly, white men in charge of these companies. And it's, I found them very touching, these kind of speculative ideas of accountability in a legal system, which cannot hold these people to account.
Very courageous of her to participate in this artwork, knowing that she works for the court system, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, she has to go back and do like real work, right? So very courageous of her.
She was really into it. She loved it. She was like, oh, that's a great idea. We had this amazing conversation about the production of these images, because of course, I didn't really know so much about the making of these, but essentially courtroom sketches are produced independently by a group of artists, and then they are sold to media, right? It's not something that the court commissions. It's a product for media. And she was also like, I was like, oh, so what do people want in these? Like, what makes a good courtroom sketch? And she was like, oh, well, generally the public wants to see remorse. So they want to see the people who are on, shown as guilty in kind of poses of remorse. And so it's kind of a very interesting artistic practice of kind of rendering, remorse with these very particular watercolor sketches, and they have to be done very fast, and there's a lot of responsibility in them. And I don't know, I was fascinated with Sharon's work. I hope to work with her again, actually. There she is.
Hello.
Hey, Sharon.
Yes, very lovely. Do we have Adnan in the room? Because Adnan was there. It is Adnan. Do you want to come on? It'd be amazing to have you. Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Hey, just before you go on, Adnan co-curated the 5th episode of the first season with me. It was a crazy 5.5-hour conversation. It's been watched thousands of times on YouTube. It's like, please watch it. And Adnan is the co-director of Stylish Baden-Baden Kunsthalle, where Simon's class was part of the opening program of the institution. And we were lucky enough to also be, as New Center for Eastern Practice, to be invited to broadcast and participate as part of the program. And I was also going to be there for it, but I didn't end up going. I regret not going. But anyways, maybe you can.
There will be a lot of opportunities
Absolutely.
that you will visit
now,
with your work.
Maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe you should, because you said you're going to talk about both the 2 exhibitions, right? Hitos, and you said I was there, I can talk about it. But also tell us a little bit about your program, because it was so fascinating to see how, for your beginning of your program, as a way to respond to the situation, you went back to the art students rather than like necessarily art stars, right? And then you said, let's start from the bottom. And you brought these very young Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen post-Z people to the institution to sort of like use it and occupy it. And like, you know what I mean? I mean, the programming was crazy, 10 a.m. to midnight for how many days, right? You guys must have like died of work, right? What was going on? Just tell us a little bit about that too, because, watching it from afar and the broadcast that we helped to promote and take part in was really like beautiful, chaotic, like intense. Yeah, so go ahead.
First of all, You are such a great moderator. I mean, thank you for taking, caring, and sharing. I hope Jaleh is watching us, and maybe she can come in too, because
Absolutely.
recently I started to feel like without her, I can't function. We are achieving a kind of level of collectivity that it's not only, I mean, through the whole time, there are maybe 3 points I would like to contribute, because your discussion, especially Jaleh's point of how the corporate identity is not only transforming the mode of production, but mood of the production is an excellent evidence of understanding our subjectivities. And your contribution to Simon's work is amazing. So I wouldn't intervene this amazing stream of discussions, but 3 points I would like to say. It's always hard to talk about your own work. So, but one thing I'm very proud with Jaleh, we prioritize art students, because 5% of art graduates maybe continue their practice or not, which means a lot of people only in their whole life get one graduation show. And one of the comments that we get through 24 events of 2 weeks, like kind of revenging 3 or 4 months of lockdown on a marathon of, yes, these days we can gather people, low risk people at a kind of isolated place. I'm sure you saw this Korean movie that the teacher closes the class and just isolates the class from the rest of the world. It was something like this. We really asked Baden-Baden to understand us, to give this privilege to students, because it's a very privileged city. It's a very privileged Kunsthalle. We wanted to provide this opportunity. You would cry because, yes, it was crazy, but at the same time, Simon saw it too. They missed producing together. They missed using spaces. After months of screening, monitoring each other, they were so happy to be together. And we were even afraid of, are they going to party too much or intervene into the local? No, they were amazing. They really understood the importance of sharing that moment. So it was a good lesson. I mean, in the next maybe time of the discussion that's left now, I think I would like that Simon talks a bit. This is my second point. Simon likes to talk about the relationship we have with the state or states now as artists and curators, because earlier his work, the passport piece, and all the distance that he takes between the private and public, I'm super interested in his advice, because we as the Kunsthalle also invited their class to tell us how they communicate between each other. To be honest, their website, especially shared materials, conversations, was a good start for us to imagine another website, which is not our own website, it's a project website. You can now go and see conditions of necessity. We want to have a critical distance to the institution, to learn from these classes, to come back and change the institution. In the beginning, their energy is so inspirational. And third point, I think Mo really stepped into a very important discussion talking about ugly as a term, which I don't agree, but his intention, his nose is always getting a good smell earlier than others. His point is right, because Simon has a kind of material use, you could say, really like an art fair kind of coldness, but also corporate identity perfection, like packing, like a layout, design, presentableness. I call it more texture of everyday. And I think through this material use, we can go through Jaleh's point again and understand how are we going to keep the understanding of reality, because I think that concerns us the most, what to prioritize, like in order to organize collectively what's necessary to do it now, and how do we prioritize these things, because it's, I think at the moment, an important time also to learn co-organizing. It's clear that the isolation and the other forms of opening up, closing it down, opening up, closing it down, all these territories of COVID-19, we need to synchronize. We need to understand how we move together, because the state is not there as we know. Thank you, everyone.
Because you had a question from Simon, but because you talked about your third point, I would say just reiterate your question, because I'm sure Simon is like, oh my God, what was Adnan asking? So, right?
Yeah, I'm good. I think, and then you asked about the public and the private and the relationship between states.
And the passport piece.
Exactly. So maybe just to background, like way back in 2012, I made an artwork about the New Zealand passport. And this was shown at Art Basel. So there's a weird public-private moment even there. It was a state, we received state funding for my private gallery to send me to an art fair. So there's another kind of mix of that thing. But I made a documentary with a journalist named Simon Pound, who is a New Zealander who was working for the state TV station at the time, which was being closed down because it was being defunded. And I asked him to do a kind of final episode of his news show by interviewing all the people that made the new New Zealand passport design of that period. So there was like a brand new, much more graphic passport design with a story as its center. And it was telling a positivist history through images of the development of the tools of discovery, which is very loaded in the context of New Zealand being a colonial nation. So it's sort of every page of the passport has an illustration of a technological object that was a tool for navigation. So it also tries to bridge and smooth out a lot of conflict by starting with Māori ways of navigating so indigenous New Zealand ways of navigating via stars and various different objects that were used in, I guess, 1400-ish by indigenous New Zealanders. And then it sort of seamlessly bridges into telescopes and then kind of ends up at some point at Google. And I mean, that is anyway like
Magic.
a story. Yeah, a story.
It's a great artwork.
Navigation. But I mean, I think even the artwork that I just talked about now, what I found when I started looking at companies and when I did a show also for New Zealand, commissioned by the New Zealand government for the New Zealand Venice Pavilion in 2015, I did it about the NSA and New Zealand's relationship to the US and the surveillance network they use. And the first thing that I kind of came into contact with is there's no easy way to separate private companies from the state. That is just not something that you can do very easily. Certainly not in the US, but also not in New Zealand. And, the dialogue between industry, private companies, money, and state is exactly what I was trying to also put together in these drawings, which look at the accountability of various different people in charge of companies. So I think, and also, I guess, coming from a very colonially focused discourse in New Zealand, we know that colonialism and the projects of colonial things often start with commercial, mercantile enterprises, which are supposedly not connected to states in a very direct way, that then lay the foundations for the formation of a more politically formalized state relationship. So I think there's often this push-pull between two different types of power, I guess, that get wielded often in between the same people. Donald Trump, obviously famous businessman, whatever. I mean, these things are kind of intertwined. That is not to say that there's no reason not to have these divisions, because of course we know why states should behave like states and whatever. But it's just within my work, especially when you're addressing technology, what is the internet? It's the U.S. Army's development that was then commercialized and always designed for data capture, designed for that reason in the military, deployed for that reason commercially. Between the state and the companies that administer and control it, not so easy to see where one begins and the other ends.
What is the secret of this harmony in your class? How they organize themselves?
Oh, I can answer that, but maybe Jaleh has something to say.
No, just quickly, I appreciate the last point that you made tremendously. My entire project is basically a footnote or a way of addending the culture sphere onto Giovanni Arrighi's argument in the long 20th century. Yeah. That, we can periodize or historicize capitalism through these cycles of accumulation. The the Genovese cycle, because Italy wasn't a nation state yet, the Dutch cycle, the British cycle, the American cycle. And I appreciate a lot your point about these kinds of mercantile elements being R&D to state formation. So one of Arrighi's, I think, most brilliant points is the way in which British piracy, British pirates, paved the way for what then became the reign of Queen Elizabeth. This kind of way in which markets do the scouting that then gets appropriated by the state, and then the state figures out how to allocate those resources. So I think that's a really brilliant point you made. The other thing I want to say, because you asked me what other artists I was thinking about, and I put you in a category, because that's what art historians do. Pardon, I'm sorry, but we do that. We think in categories. So in my mind, I have your practice there with Styrell's and Hirschhorn's, but one practice that's getting a lot of discursive attention that I think eventually I will have to make a critical intervention into is that around Trevor Paglen, right? Because I thought about it because you raised the NSA and NSA surveillance, and Paglen's whole point is about how to represent, or representation is the wrong word, how to grasp and figure these zones of unrepresentability, zones of darkness, that immense government funds are going into, but that we, the people, have no access to, these grand opaque zones. But my concern about Trevor's work is that it's tremendously techno-fetishistic. I'm not sure I like his process or his practice. And back to Mohammed's term, ugly, I think you really protect yourself against that kind of, NSA sublime, for lack of a better way of putting it, that I think Paglen is engaged in. But just very quickly, I want to return to something Adnan said.
Great.
So my point earlier had been that the mode of production under which we are living isn't only about the production and circulation and consumption of goods. It's about the production, circulation, and consumption of subjects. Right? That's my kind of key thing. And I think that's what Shoshana Zuboff is really onto, that what these algorithms do that is kind of new and special and unlike anything we've seen in the past. So real mining is mining geological strata, geopolitical spaces. That the kind of mining that Shoshana Zuboff is talking about is mining not a spatial register, but a temporal register. And what is being mined is not the subject, but the future of the subject. This ability for the algorithm to guess.
It's important to say that you cannot really talk about this unless you talk about the futures market, the hedge, in finance, because these technologies that are now in digital were already in the making in 1970s with less digital participation, but in the way that the market was reimagined when sort of like these other technologies of trading beside stocks were introduced, which was all about sort of like having a grip on the future.
Right.
And then machines, computers sort of like democratized it, but also made it more tangible and physical.
Right. So now we have all these people working at hedge funds who are panicking that, algorithms might be better at hedging. But the phenomenon of the hedge fund is I think, specific to the 90s. It was all so back to the Arrighi-ish relationship between the state and the market. It was under Clinton, where various rules were changed around the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission. He deregulated that, and that allowed for this kind of mushroom-like proliferation of hedge funds, which are now being taken over by algorithms. But I'd like to underscore Mo's point that was the moment where finance ceased to be about sort of the trade and exchange of quantifiable commodities in the spatial world and came to be purely speculative and abstract.
And about future.
Right, the future, right. The temporal register and trading on futures. That's right.
I think here we need Hito Steyr. Luckily, I mean, not related with the conditions of necessity, but now, when Mo said anyone seen Hito's show in Düsseldorf, me, I was lucky to see both of them between 2 weeks break. And actually, the programming is really important to open space these two practices, because they are not making exhibitions, they are creating learning environments now. Because literally in Hito's show, previously is a keyword, because you see in the new work, Socialism 2020, there are this narrator repeating itself previously, which is kind of bringing all the Hito Steyr works and language back, like a sort of postscriptum, but also bringing a quite important story with breeding in the beginning and ending up with policing, how algorithm also completely changed the way they dance as a queer performance collective. So the allegory of how the art market materializes the new artistic idea, and how meanwhile we are processing the stateless in a kind of loss of status quo, but with remerging of these corporates designing new ways of intimacy. It was really necessary work. I thought this is like the time in 2013 in Venice Biennial, Massignano Giovanni's amazing show. Hito's work was in the Garden of Arsenal, How Not to Be Seen, a fucking educational mob file. And that work, Hito really brought another new form. I mean, in comparison with earlier work, in that work, she was entering into another mental space. And the work had a lot of fun, not only the filming of the documentary and idea, but also fun. And I think she's back to that kind of space in her mind. And with a really very personal story in the beginning, almost poetic, she really creates a great work. The exhibition is an excellent opportunity for a lot of things. If you haven't seen the Venice piece and BK show, this and that, it's a real. I first asked who is the architect, and I was so happy to hear that she designed the floor plan and the basic install decisions herself. It's a great show, and ironically, it's in the cellar, in the basement. Like, you really need to go down in the institution. Like, that video darkness turns into a capitalist brightness. I love the show, and of course, one of my favorite pieces for this year is Human Cage from Simon Denny. And they work so good together, the Socialism 2020 piece and the Human Cage have a strong connection between each other. As an object and as a film, they show us the time of intimacy and isolation. Either at a state level or an individual level, we need to think about what do we open up and for whom we close to.
It's amazing that these shows, who were in planning for at least like a year or two, if not like more, coincide with COVID at this moment in this particular city, right? Like, you have Hito and Simon showing these work that are like very related, and then like we get Jaleh to compare them together and all that. You know, it's quite amazing. But guys, we're over the time. I don't want to exploit you for very little fee we're able to pay you as a small institution that actually not to the level of like other like digital institutions, but we've actually kind of like thrived a little bit through COVID. New Center has grown through COVID because people were bored, so they purchased memberships to watch our videos. And this growth of membership also, like, we were sort of like, I was very like uneasy about like what's going to happen in September when we admit new students. I was afraid that like we're going to see like a huge drop. In fact, we saw an increase. Also, another deficit that we always had which were a number of women who applied to study philosophy and other stuff. We had more women applicants than ever. And it was like really amazing stuff. I was just like, what's going on? This COVID is having a positive. Am I like, what
A
are
big
we?
change also, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be in like Jeff Bezos' team saying like, I really benefited from the suffering of people, right? But really, it kind of at least we can maintain our program and services for another year at least. We'll see how these opening and closing and all that will has its ripple effect and impact on us. And also the generous help of German government really helped the New Center to survive throughout the COVID, with a little bit of cash that was injected. I was really appreciative of this. And but yeah, so you know what I mean? That's why, like, there was a point in York's text, which I send you guys as something to read, which is like, everybody demands this type of like funding from the same government that we're immediately accusing of racism and sexism and colonialism. So how come their money is good, but that's why we don't dab into those types of stuff, because I think as bad as the democratic governments around the world are, even including Trump and America, I think everyone understood that like these conditions need to be aided, helped. And you know what I mean? Of course, some countries did it better, like Germany, Canada. I don't know what they offer to artists and others in Australia and New Zealand, but like Canada really did well. And then a friend of us who's actually also on the board of the New Center, she's advocating, Zainab Verji is advocating like a basically universal basic income should begin for artists. We should just like, don't try to like isolate a town and give it to and see how does it impact, but start with artists. Artists are the perfect group that can begin this experiment of like just given funds. So there's interesting stuff happening after COVID. But David, you sat quietly and enjoyed the conversation. And it's okay if you don't say anything, because you're a writer and you would rather take notes and write. But we really would like to hear from you, and like maybe we close with some commentary by you, at least on what you heard, and or just some kind of like, because you know what I mean, both me and Jaleh are exiles from New York. It's true, right? I'm in Berlin, she's in Vancouver. And when I said earlier for now in Vancouver, is because unconsciously I'm kind of upset that she's stuck in Vancouver. I want her to be in like a place like Paris, London, Berlin, New York, because she's of a person. Fabulous. Yeah, fabulous, right? And she's like, so I was like, oh my God, what if I offended her and said bye now? No, she's quite fine in Vancouver, but I want her to be out of the small city and back into the larger sort of like the cosmopolitan world. Maybe she doesn't. But yeah, so from someone who lived through COVID in New York and saw the closing and the opening up of the art world, just give us some observations you've had, some trends you picked up. You talked about the race riots and what happened with like Black Lives Matter. That was great, but like a little bit more in that direction.
Well, something about the whole situation is very embarrassing for me personally, but I realized other people shared my embarrassing perspective, was how many people actually sort of weirdly enjoy the new world order. Like, you don't have to go anywhere anymore. You can just email or text, or now, as I'm discovering today, somewhat awkwardly Zoom with people. You don't have to go out anymore. And that suits a certain kind of person, place you are in life, or a certain temperament, a depressive temperament, an introverted temperament, philosophical temperament. I don't know. I loved it in a sick way. I mean, I didn't like the idea of people dying, or myself being threatened by moving, handling a guardrail or something, like, oh my God, oh no, what happened? But I liked it. It was like suits my like temperament and my perspective on life. But at the same time, I was happy to go to galleries again.
Yeah.
And notice that they weren't really any different. There are never a lot of people in most galleries, so it's very easy to socially distance in them. What would you like to know about New York? I don't know. I'm not the worst person to talk to. I'm here all the time, though. It's true.
You were in New York for all time. So, any exhibition that stood out for you? Any kind of new trend that you saw that you think it has some kind of leg and is going to like continue on?
The only thing I can think of in terms of new trends would not really relate that much to aesthetic phenomena. artistic phenomena, that sort of thing, intellectual phenomena, to the extent that I'm aware of them. I think that will take a little bit more time for one to feel that really. But it's, again, in that sort of institutional, financial, mercantile, institutional frameworks, things like online viewing rooms, which, they're funny, actually. That's kind of weird comedy of life. That's great. Oh, you've been invited to our online viewing room. It's like, oh my God, it's just a website. Who cares? Who the fuck cares? It's nothing. I mean, it's beautiful nothing. It's a nice gallery, but it's just nothing.
That's why Simon's intervention by doing the Minecraft is kind of like trying to break out of that and make it into something more in the temporal spirit, right? Like where like things are happening. People come and take things down.
Right.
Instead of like going to this kind of like beautiful florist kind of online experience of the artwork and the beautiful flower shop gallery, I don't know. That's like such a niche sort of thing, though, the online viewing room. It's not a terribly interesting thing to talk about, but those are the things that really appear to me like very prominently in terms of like the new situation of art and its consumption, shall we say. It's understanding post-COVID. I think, more like what we would think of in a maybe idealistic sense as aesthetic or intellectual phenomenon. Maybe I'm just not really that in tune. In fact, I know I'm not, but I think that will take a little bit more time to really see.
Something that I really want to like talk about at the end, and it has to do with New York. And I didn't expect you to bring it up because it's a super hot potato topic to talk about. And I think maybe like me, given my sort of like semi-autonomy from the art world, like I'm the only one in this panel that can actually talk about it, which is not the fact that Nancy Spector was resigned from Guggenheim, but the way in which her canceling played out, like was a long story, right? It started last year with like what was going on around like the Basquiat thing, right? But the insistence that she was both canceled and not canceled. She was canceled, but then the way the institution celebrated her departure and the way she talks about it is a new way of cancellation that was invented in New York in Nancy Spector's case, in which you lose your job for some kind of like historical, but also your own sort of like mistakes you made in terms of how she didn't invite the guest curator to the panel and all that stuff. But the way the institution dealt with it, I thought, okay, this is a novel way in which like an institution can deal with a problematic figure, which I think Guggenheim should take credit for, right? Because it's like, she got canceled, but she didn't really get canceled. She just like left, right? So it's like, usually cancellations don't happen like that. You know what I mean? Cancellations happen like crazy, and you get like, you lose all your legacy, all the good stuff you've done, all the mediocre stuff you've done. Everybody just focuses on the bad stuff, and then you're supposed to banish, right? But I think in a way, maybe I'm getting old, but I actually thought the way it got handled was not so bad.
It's hard for me to say. I don't know.
I know
the whole thing, and I don't have any. I don't know Nancy very well, barely at all, really. But I think it's really incredibly shabby the way she's been treated. Someone who really gave almost her entire life, her professional life, since she was like her early 20s, to the Guggenheim, to be graciously, carefully canceled or just vulgarly outright canceled. I think that's whatever. I think that's a bad sign for the way our culture is going in terms of what can and can't be said, who can and can't make a mistake or an error of judgment. Right. It puts everyone in a sense of like fear and like, what the fuck? Pardon me. I think it's very, very bad. I don't know. I don't have a good feeling about it.
Thank you for saying that. I've been waiting for someone to say precisely what you just said. If you could maybe just sort of write that or put it on your Facebook page, or I would be eternally grateful for that note in what I think is really vulgar.
Horrible. I mean, just like imagine yourself in her position, whatever you have supposedly done, to just be like, I don't know. I mean, really just like taken out decorously like the good trash. I don't care. It's just not right.
No, I think what it does is set a kind of precedent for the adjudication for this bizarre judgment of other people's minor misjudgments, as though we weren't sharing this kind of phenomenology of existence where we're just groping in the dark together and figuring out what to do from one day to the next, 1 week to the next. I think it sets a dreadful precedent.
It's terrible. I don't feel any eloquence about it, and I don't have a personal stake in it, but I feel about it very personally. Right. It's a bad thing, and it just makes me feel very like icky. It's icky.
Yeah. Thank you.
So even if it was sort of done in kind of an interesting, good way, I mean, I just remember reading Richard Armstrong's comments about Nancy as if, I don't know, it was like so distant, so like barely there. And I thought, like, she's been with you for like 30 fucking years, almost 25 years, you know, half her life or more, half my life. And I just think that's terrible. She didn't do such horrible things. She did very fine things for the most part at that museum. You know, she wasn't really a rear guard, evil figure. And to have her like just like thrown aside by what seems to one just reading the press about it. I'm not even talking about like the back alley chit chat of the art world, just reading press releases and things in the official venues. It just seems so like awful. I don't know. And it makes you think like, God, could that happen to me, to someone I'm close to? It could. And that's bad. It's not good thing. That's not progressive. There's nothing progressive about that.
It's the weight of the real politics, right? Like what's happening in America, and the way these issues are perceived will have an impact in the art world, right? And I mean, this is sort of like what you get, right?
Mo, do you think this kind of new way of behaving toward other people, this bizarre new intersubjective environment we're in, where people are just getting canceled and disappeared on a whim, I think that has a lot to do with Facebook. I think what we're seeing is the actualization of a mode of sociality that commenced with the blocking, the unfriendling, and
absolutely.
It's finding its way into you know,
larger social.
I like Simon's work very much. In again, as I said, it's this walking this tightrope where we understand how porous our virtual selves are with our real selves, and at the same time, we're also kind of being protected from the worst of what that might entail. But I think what's happened with Spectre at the Guggenheim is really an actualization of the most infantile aspects of bringing Facebook behavior to life. So anyway, I'm wondering if you think that you know, these virtual platforms might have a lot to do with these new intersubjective politics.
I mean, it's true, but also it's of course I agree with you 100%. But we also have to talk about how these older institutions are unable to deal with this new mode of sociality. Yeah. So this is what they end up doing.
Right.
When the push from the social media reaches to the level of Guggenheim, this is what Guggenheim can do. They can just politely put her in a package and just throw her off the like what do you call it?
The spiral.
Yeah, the spiral, right? Like just like, okay, sorry, you know.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully institutions will learn how to deal with this, right? How the push and pull works, right? And especially in case of people who don't deserve to be canceled, right? Because I mean we were talking about it in like a curatorial seminar I was guest for Adnan at the News Center, and I said, you know, like democracy, like freedom, like objectivity, like subjectivity, everything is relative, right? Like cancellation is also relative. Some people do deserve to be canceled, right? But it's how they're canceled, who gets to decide, what causes it, and all that, and needs to be looked at. You know, it's not like we can say all cancellation is bad. Freedom of speech is like absolute. No, it's not absolute. It's relative, right? So it's about how institutions would learn to understand how these new technologies and these new forms of sociality and the impact they have on a society have to be kind of absorbed and processed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's. I think I've done a lot of I've done a lot of research in conservative circles, let's say, so to learn about the people that make the platforms that we're talking about, and they often use the free speech argument to advance their positions. So it's a difficult one. Also, I have to say I need to go because I need to meet somebody IRL. But thank you so much, Mo.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
It was a lively conversation, and I'm glad by bringing up Guggenheim, I actually made David speak very important words.
Yes.
This was really like quality and quantity, right? Like you just spoke few words, and I think this video will be watched, and you'll be implicated for what you said. So just prepare, okay? So
thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure.
And
Great pleasure.
for asking question on the side. And yeah, and you hear about our next, we have something programmed for a couple of weeks from now, but I would not hold you guys up, and we will announce it very soon. Thank you so much, Jaleh.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.